Did you just throw your phone?
No, I did not throw the phone.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Beg Pardon. As always, I'm your host Anthony, joined by Carlos, and welcome to the show. How's it going, Carlos?
Pretty good. It was kind of like, today. It was, I don't know, like when it's cloudy or drizzling, you kind of feel tired.
Yeah? It rained here all day today, and it rained here all day yesterday. And then, like, my day hustle, or whatever you want to call it, my
Your job?
my day, yeah, yes and no, like, I don't know. But, I mean, I spend all day outside, like, I mean, out in the elements. I'm either in my car or, like, physically outside. So it's very irritating. And weirdly enough, the people who get, like, the largest amount of items delivered to their homes live in, like, third floor walk-up apartments. I delivered a 50 pound bag of flour to a third floor walk-up apartment. What do you need with 50 pounds of flour, sir? It's a really... It's an apartment. It wasn't like a business. Yeah.
I mean, that's very reminiscent of the animated Mulan when they were walking with the water buckets like on their shoulders. That's what I imagine the flour's like for you.
That was terrible.
I mean, getting those gains in though. All those 50-pound bags.
I'm getting my muscles. I'm gonna get you
Planet
situated.
Fitness who?
Right. I'm gonna get you situated here. My phone's acting up, so I apologize. This week we are talking about the history of our respective cities in which we reside in. I don't know. How do you feel?
My city's history is not as exciting as I expected it to be. My hometown's history, very much so.
Right.
But the city I reside in, I was like, okay. I mean, all right.
All right.
Yeah. Now, good on you. But before, it's okay.
Would you like to go first?
I mean, with that kind of hype, who wouldn't?
Right.
Yeah, so basically I learned that Orlando dates back to 1838 at the height of the Seminole Wars. So going back to Native American Wars. And it was originally, there was a small town that was founded. The Army built a fort called Fort Gatlin. It was south of Orlando. And it was to protect the settlers from the Native Americans. And that small community kind of became a bigger deal in 1840, and it was called Jernigan, I think is how you pronounce it. Named after basically the first permanent settler in the area. He's the one who settled there first. So, like, can you imagine if you got there first and they just called it, like, instead of Houston, it was Anthonyville or something? Like,
I'm like, this is mine?
Yeah, you're like, yeah, I got here first, so.
Weird.
But yeah, and it stayed that way until 1857 when settlement expanded northward, and then the community changed the name to Orlando. But Orlando didn't become an incorporated city until 1875, and it had 85 inhabitants, with 22 of whom were qualified voters. So, and it was big in cattle ranching. I was to say it was big in cattle ranching and citrus farming. So.
Okay. Florida oranges. This reminds me of that.
Yeah.
His voice isn't like that in the commercials. I don't know why I did that.
It is not. I don't know.
That was creepy. I apologize.
I was like, you were going for something there. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the name Orlando, no one knows what the story is because there's 4 different stories. And when you look at, like, when you research it, it literally tells you there was 4 stories. You pick the one you like the most.
Wow.
Yeah, it's everything from a judge who worked in Orlando to get a county seat, and he named it after somebody who worked for him, up to that same judge named it after a Shakespeare character, possibly, from As You Like It, one of the least heard of Shakespeare plays I've never heard of. We didn't study that in high school English, so Thanks for preparing me for the world, Springfield. Um, there was also another version where Mr. Orlando was on his way to Tampa with a caravan of ox and died, and people just said, "There lies Orlando," and that became the name of the town.
That sounds so made up. But watch that be the real one.
Yeah, and then
There
there's
lies
a
Orlando.
there's a final theory. Imagine like that was just a tombstone though that people just read. Like if that's how every city started.
There
like
lies Orlando.
there lies Jack, like just around the country. That was where the cities.
There
Um,
lies Wyoming. There lies
the family
Bismarck.
name. The final theory though is much more like extravagant, and it was basically a sentinel who was watching over, the people and everything during the night. His name was Orlando Reeves, and he tried to warn all the settlers and his other soldiers and stuff of a Native American like sneak attack. They basically made it sound like it was like a Trojan horse version for the Native Americans, and instead of shooting at them, I guess he shot in the air to warn the people, and then he was immediately killed by a slew of arrows. So they named it after him when he was buried. And I was like, there's a lot of holes in this story too. I don't know if any of these stories are true. I feel like there's a lot less. I think there's a fifth story no one's telling us about Orlando, but
Right.
those are the four
Isn't
stories
that
you get
y'all's
from me.
newspaper? Isn't it called the Sentinel?
Yeah, the Orlando Sentinel.
Yeah.
So maybe that is, I don't know. Maybe that's one
Maybe
people
it-
want to go with because he was a hero. I don't know.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Houston is named after General Sam Houston. I hope his first name's Sam. Yeah, Sam Houston, who beat the Mexican army in 1836. So we're around there.
Pretty close. Yeah.
And Texas ended up getting their independence from Mexico in the Battle of San Jacinto. So that was like the whole. There's like a battle memorial here near the city for that battle. And then Houston was founded on August 30th, 1836, with like the purchase of some land by some notable gentleman of that time. And in 1846, Texas became the 20th state of the United States.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's way sooner than I thought.
Yeah. And then 1861, I can't help but to put that in there. They did not choose wisely. And the residents of Houston, along with Texas, obviously voted to secede from the United States and forged their own path in the Civil War. And, I mean, spoiler alert, we know who the winners were of that, and it wasn't them. So they ended up coming back into the Union, I think, in like 1870.
Okay. So Orlando still wasn't even a real city yet. Because that wasn't until 1875. So, okay. A little bit older town. A little.
Yeah. So give me some 1900s vibes from Orlando.
Whole lot of nothing in my book. And we don't really speed up in Orlando history until about 1964. 1964, again, the only thing that I consider where history starts is when Walt was looking for acres of land, Walt Disney. After he had already opened Disneyland in California, Walt was going through and he used a plane to kind of survey some of the land. And he bought up 27,000 acres through like other front men and things like that to try to keep it under wraps because he didn't want people to know his whole plan for like the parks and everything. He tried to be as quiet as possible.
Was it his hope to do like a coast to coast thing, or did luck just so have it that that's what happened?
Well, he was looking to do another park because he wanted to correct the mistakes that he saw in Disneyland. So as you remember, we went to Disneyland. The city's literally right there. Like there's an IHOP right across the street from like where you walk in, and here in Florida, I mean, you really can't see the outside world at all from the parks. And he really wanted that, like, you're truly immersed in his vision. You don't see anything else. There's no outside distractions. I think Florida's probably just the best bet because of the weather, too. You don't have to worry about, like, snow or anything like that. And he probably was...
Hurricanes
Well, it's central, so
That's
it's
true,
a little bit
yeah.
better. Yeah. And it's also kind of probably cheaper, I think, land than it was in Texas or anything like that where it's hotter. So maybe that was the other reason.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's what happened in '64. He's kind of buying up the land, and when you talk to locals here and stuff, they all say, people like to play it off that no one knew what was going on. He was like, but everyone assumed it was Disney. Like everyone assumed Disney was buying this property, so it was probably the worst kept secret
Yeah.
that was going on. But then in 1966, Walt Disney ended up dying before the Magic Kingdom was actually built. Magic Kingdom didn't open until October 1st, 1971. Then it opened with Magic Kingdom, 2 resorts, the monorail, and the campgrounds. So it's a fairly big amount of things that opened. But with that came more tourism into Orlando into the 70s because now you had Disney World. In 1973, you also had SeaWorld open down here, which I didn't realize SeaWorld was that old. So Shamu's been down here quite a bit of time.
The original, the OG. Yeah.
Yeah, the OG Shamu. If he's still the one who was performing, he aged well.
Yeah.
And then, you kind of had that boom, though, of the tourism industry in Orlando because of those two things. And then Disney would open another park in 1982. So you're kind of slowly starting to build up all of these theme parks and all of this attractions and stuff to what it is now. But it really didn't hit a height in Orlando until about 1989, 1990. In 1989, Disney opened up what was then known as MGM Studios, now known as Hollywood Studios, where they have Galaxy's Edge and all those things, Toy Story Land. But they opened it because they wanted to compete. They had heard that Universal Studios was thinking about opening a movie-themed theme park in Orlando. And Disney wanted to be the first to do it because they kind of wanted to take the wind out of those sails.
Right.
And at that time, Michael Eisner was the one who was kind of the head of Disney. And they ended up kind of speeding through MGM Studios. So it opened, but it wasn't as fanfare as Magic Kingdom. Like, it wasn't as big of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it opened with really good, rides and theming because everyone loves, vintage Hollywood. And this kind of opened with that feel to it. Universal would end up opening in June of 1990. So already by 1990, you have the 3 big parks in Orlando. Disney's starting to expand into now there's 3 parks in Disney alone. And Universal came on the scene, which would go on to also have 2 parks in Universal. 3 if you count Volcano Bay now. But now you're kind of starting to see Orlando build more with the tourism and pulling people in and stuff. By 1990, it was pretty much set. And then 1998 is when Disney finally opened Animal Kingdom. So now you have 4 parks, and you're not even at the Millennium yet. So it sounds like a long time, but within a fairly short amount of time, Orlando kind of boomed with theme parks and theme industry type things. I mean, just in the 70s alone, you had Magic Kingdom and SeaWorld. So that's a pretty big deal.
Welcome to the fucking show.
Back here in the good old South, in Texas, in 1900, terrible hurricane. Up until at least like 2017, it was like the worst in U.S. history. And it killed, I think, like 6,000. I think, yeah, 6,000 people in Galveston, like right on the bay of the Gulf of Mexico. So Galveston used to be like, because it's Galveston, it's an island. Well, it's more like it's an island. Yeah, it's an island. Qualifies as an island. I was like, is it a peninsula? Like, I couldn't remember if it is or not. But Galveston Bay used to be like a really busy ship port, like for them trading stuff in and out of the bay, or out of the Gulf. And they would make it really difficult for Houston to like be part of the action, because there is a bay in Houston through like the bayous, and it like channels into the Gulf. Well, Galveston was like creating problems, so that way they couldn't get ships up and down it to get to Houston. So Galveston was like the big city kind of like in charge. Well, in 1900, there was a hurricane, Category 4 hurricane, killed 6,000 people, like decimated the land. Oh, and in 2019 equivalent, it was over $900 million in damage.
Ooh.
Absolutely decimated it. And a lot of companies and businesses were like, hey, like, we kind of don't want to put our businesses here because they're going to get washed away. Like, we don't
Yeah,
wanna,
I mean...
Yeah, and at the time, I mean, that was probably a majority of the residents died in that. So...
Yeah. That's a lot of people.
Yeah. So then a lot of people were like, what's the next closest place? Houston. So that kind of, like, in a sick way, really benefited Houston to end up becoming what it is now, because of that terrible event that happened in Galveston. And they erected like they didn't have a seawall at all in Galveston, and then after that they erected it. It's 17 feet high now, and it's kind of cool. Like, we'll make sure to put a picture up there on the screen for you guys, but there's like a huge statue that was made for after the hurricane of like this guy shielding like his family, or like helping his family. And the way it's like centered on the beach, like, and so many, like, during hurricanes now, people always take pictures of it because it looks like his arms are up and like the waves are like coming into like the city. But it was like him like shielding like his family.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. It was sad, but
yeah,
but it was cool. So then in 1901, oil was discovered in Houston in like multiple areas, and then that's, I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, like, Houston and Texas in general is like the oil capital of, like, it's like the Middle East of North America.
Yeah,
like,
black gold.
Yeah, everywhere. And then that's what kind of solidified Houston as like the place to be for like oil and gas, and that's been true to this day. Like 30% of all the oil and natural gas used in the United States comes from Houston. Or Houston area.
Wow.
Yeah, so like a ton. In 1929, they tried to establish. So now the city is like starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and
Right.
they tried to establish like zoning regulations and zoning laws. And this is something else that's kind of interesting about Houston, is that it's really only in Houston that you see like, and there's like this iconic picture. It's actually not too far from like where my actual apartment is. It's like a shopping mall, a church, and like a sex store, like all right together. And there's no, and they started like really early on trying to pass like these zoning regulations, and the citizens kept rejecting them. Like, they didn't want zoning laws. They wanted to just be able to build wherever, whatever height, whatever. Like, this was like the economy was doing so great. This was like the land to do whatever you want. And so much so that they rejected it. The citizens rejected it like 4 other times, and it wasn't until 2000 or like 2001 where then the city was like, all right, like, we'll have to find other means to like control zoning in the city because y'all won't do it. So we're gonna have to like take it out of your hands. So you'll still see it in like some pockets of the city where you're like, what? Why would this be here?
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. But by 1930, 292,352 people lived in Houston, making it then the largest city in the state of Texas. So that was in 1930. So that was a long time ago. I mean,
yeah.
Again, I don't like aging us, but then in 10 years, that's 100 years ago.
I mean, yeah.
Feels kind of bad.
But it's also kind of weird because, and I mean, it's not a knock on Houston, but when I think of Texas, like, Houston's not the first thing that comes to mind. Like, usually Dallas or San Antonio comes to my mind before Houston. So it's kind of crazy to hear, like you said, 30% of the oil and everything comes from Houston. I was like, oh, damn.
Yeah. Well, like, yeah, Houston and the surrounding area. That's insane.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
oh my
way
God.
more than I expected.
Right. In 1943, the Texas Medical Center was founded. And the Texas Medical Center here in Houston, it's like the largest concentration of medical centers and medical like research institutions and things like that in the United States.
Wow.
Here in Houston, yeah, and that's really cool. Like, it's a really, really big like medical research facilities here. In 1947, the Alley Theater was established, and it's kind of it's in what is like the arts and entertainment district downtown, and outside it's only second in the whole United States to Broadway in New York City, which was really cool too for like
That's
live
a really
theater.
big deal.
Yeah, for like live theater
Yeah.
and stuff. And again, you wouldn't think that.
No,
You just
I would have
wouldn't-
assumed Orlando would be, because again, all the entertainment and theme parks and stuff. I would have assumed that would have been like the place, because they do have like the theaters here, like the Dr. Phillips Theater and stuff like that, where they do plays and stuff. But the fact that Houston has it, that's a little mind blowing to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, too, people don't realize, like, whenever they think about Texas, they think about, like, Dallas and San Antonio and, like, Austin even and stuff like that.
Victoria.
Like, people also don't think, like, Houston's also the fourth largest city in the United States. So it's
Yeah.
New York, New York, LA, Chicago, Houston.
Mhm.
So some of it makes sense and some of it, like, doesn't make sense.
Some of it's also like,
Right. And then, like I said earlier, in 1948, they tried the zoning thing again, and people just kept fighting it back. And they tried it again, like in the 90s. They tried it again in the early 2000s. And then the population of the city finally reached 1 million in 1955. And now the metro area here is like 6.9 million, 6.7 million.
wow.
But somewhere around, yeah, it's huge. 1969, obviously the Houston is the first word said from the lunar surface.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
And that's because
Yeah.
in 1961 they moved NASA to Houston. Lyndon Johnson did, and people were like, "Well, it's probably because, dude, you're from Texas," and that was probably why.
Definitely why.
Yeah, definitely why. I didn't see another reason for it. I don't know where he is from exactly though in Texas, but I knew he was a Texan. But I don't know.
Let's say
where.
Houston for the purpose of this.
Yeah, just for purposes of the show, we'll say that's where he's from. Again, we teach you guys what history really is, and
McGraw Hill.
right. Oh, they're gonna have to start sponsoring the show. This is the second McGraw Hill reference that we made. And then in the year 2000, and this was a really big deal to me. It's something that one of the things that I love most about this city. In the year 2000, starting in the year 2000 up until currently, that was the first year that Houston effectively had no racial majority in the city. There's no majority, and
Wow.
it's a minority majority, but one minority doesn't make up a majority of the population, and nearly 25% of all residents of this city are foreign born. That's a lot too.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
Whew.
But like, it just keeps Houston just keeps kind of growing out because there's not too many places left for it to like grow up, and there's a lot of there's a lot of space. I think it's and I'll insert a blurb if this turns out to not be true, but it's like 640 or 600 odd some square miles. Square miles is the actual city of Houston, making it the largest city in the United States by miles, not population, but the largest city in the United States. Yeah.
Phew.
So crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I wish I would have
Backyard.
found out about Orlando. I didn't find out the city dimensions of Orlando, and I should have. Everyone who's listening from Orlando, I failed you, by the way. I live
Shout
here.
out-
I'm not from here, so.
shout out to our Houston listeners. Y'all are strong on here too. Y'all are strong on
Yeah.
here. Shout out to Houston
Yeah.
listeners. So I hope that
This is
I hope that I did not embellish anything.
I was gonna say this is why the Orlando listener base isn't as strong as Houston, because I
Right.
don't help our case the way you helped Houston.
So there's a city.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about Disney.
Well, like I told you about Orlando. This is what really mattered.
Right.
But today Orlando has like the University of Central Florida, which has one of the best hospitality programs in the country. It's a really great program.
Nice.
It's home to like Rosen Hotels, which is also a really great brand of hotels. and they do really great work. Like with their staff, they treat their staff really well. For anyone who's interested in Rosen, we'll put a link at the bottom of the video so you can check them out. There's 2 airports here. There's a smaller one in Kissimmee, and then there's a big international airport in Orlando itself. And I don't know about you, but I just feel more comfortable if I'm flying into an international airport than just like a regular airport. I feel kind of like,
Not me. I get.
am I gonna make it?
Not that I feel safer, but I feel stressed if I'm flying into like an international. Like Hartfield Jackson in Atlanta is a nightmare. I hate.
Yeah, that's different.
Huh?
That's different because everyone hates Atlanta's airport.
Oh, you really want those listeners to go down, don't you?
Well, I'm just saying, like everyone always complains about Atlanta. Everyone hates Atlanta's airport because everyone complains it's so like complicated to get around.
Yeah.
Like JFK is an international airport, but JFK is fairly easy to get around.
Yeah.
Orlando's is international. It's fairly easy. There's like a monorail you have to take between terminals sometimes, but it's fairly easy to get around. But like you said, if you're going into an airport and you have to run from one gate to the next and you have no idea where you're going, like that's stressful. Like Detroit's.
Right. Yeah. We have 2 airports here. Well, we have more than 2, but we have like 2 main ones. George Bush International, right? Ode to the chief. George Bush International. And we have Hobby Airport / Southwest. So Southwest, that's it. Like if you fly Southwest, that's where it is. They like own that airport. There's like maybe like 2 or 3 other like lines, but it's like all Southwest, the whole airport.
Southwest is like, come on.
Yeah, it's ours. But like yeah, so if you're flying Southwest, you for sure are coming into Hobby. You're not going into anywhere else. You're for sure coming into Hobby. You're not going into Bush. And then if you fly anything else, 90% chance you're going to be flying into George Bush. And they're both like Hobby's a little bit closer to the city center, and George Bush is a little bit like farther out, like 35 minutes out of the city center.
That's not too bad.
Yeah. And again, this city was built on like oil and gas, so obviously they love to drive, which resulted in like there was no real planning to make Houston, like there wasn't like a plan to be like we're gonna make this metropolis and we're gonna focus on like public transportation to make it easy for people. This was just an oil and gas city, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's why, like in Houston, they have like some of the worst commutes in the country because there's public transportation here is awful. It is abysmal, and I love public transportation. So that was like that's a really grinding thing for me. Is that it's so bad here? It's awful. Like there's no like subway, and then people are like, well, there's no subway because everything's a swamp down here. And it was built on a swamp. But there's like 9 miles of underground tunnels downtown where there's like shopping centers and shopping malls, and they made them so that way the people that work in the office buildings never had to go out into the heat.
Priorities, I guess.
All right. So I was like, there's a light rail, and they're working on making the light rail connections like to branch out farther, but it still doesn't service like most regions in the city. Like you can't, unless you live like in the network of it, you're not, it's pointless. It might well not even exist.
That's odd because I mean Houston has 2, I believe, major league sports teams. You have the Houston Rockets and the Astros.
And the Texans.
I didn't know the Texans were in Houston.
Yeah.
I'm not big NFL, so but so you have 3. And you know, public transportation is kind of a big thing that people take to get into the parks.
Well, so
like the stadiums and stuff.
Public transportation is available for all of those places.
Okay, good. Because I was gonna say that kind of sucks.
Yeah, they're all on a bus route and the light rail system in the city.
Okay.
And then for the Astros and the Rockets, and I can't remember the. It's not like a. I don't know how you classify leagues for soccer.
MLS?
Yeah, but it's not MLS. It's like You know, if you have like
Like Premier League and stuff?
not the NBA. Yeah, they're like the Houston Dynamo. I don't know what they categorize as. But all of those stadiums downtown, they're also serviced by a circulator called the Green Link and the Orange Link, and it's a bus system downtown that goes to like all of these spots. That's completely free.
Oh,
So
nice.
that's nice. Yeah. So if you ever come into the city and you want to catch a game or whatever, you can ride it for free after you pay $60 to park in a parking lot. Which
I was gonna say they're expensive.
I bear witness to that because the parking is so limited. It was like we went downtown for like some event, or I was taking my mom somewhere, and it was like $62 to like park, and I was like,
Jeez.
hard pass. I could have Ubered here
Yeah.
for cheaper.
Yeah. Orlando has Orlando Magic, which also came around in 1989. They play at the Amway Center, and they have the Orlando City Pride, which is a soccer team. And I don't think we have a hockey team. I think that's only in Tampa. Tampa has hockey and baseball. But driving in Orlando is not too bad to me, because again, I mean, driving in New York, you drive anywhere.
Right.
But driving here in Orlando is kind of stressful at times because either people are flying, like doing 90, or they're doing 35. There really isn't an in between.
Oh shoot.
And people are just like kind of weaving in and out of lanes like they failed their audition for the Fast movies. And then the highway's still under construction. Like since my time before, when I was still in school and I did like a college program down here, it was that same strip was still under construction
How
on the
sick.
highway.
That's
And that's
like
been like
Houston.
5 years.
Houston does that, and I was like, God, that just adds to like how terrible the traffic
Yeah.
situation is here. That's
Yeah, and
awful.
traffic can be awful here on the highway. But it's not too bad, like I said. But Orlando is the second most popular domestic travel destination. Vegas is first.
Really? I would think
Yeah.
like New York City would have been, or LA.
Nope.
Wow.
Nope. Theme parks, man, they do it to you.
Yeah.
And also a lot more, like the Orlando Convention Center is getting bigger. So, more conventions are starting to come to Florida or Orlando because the spaces are getting bigger. We went to a convention there a couple years back and went to one of the MegaCon conventions where I met Stan Lee. Side story, everyone. But it was really nice. It was really big. And I feel like eventually we'll see like D23, maybe Comic-Con and stuff move over there because they're building it to be massive. I think they're trying to build it bigger than San Diego. I don't know, but that's what it looks like anyway. Because they've been doing construction on it for a while. And in Orlando, there's out of roughly 50 million tourists that come, over 2 million are international, majority coming from the UK. So again, that's a lot of people. And internationally, that's still a lot of people coming
Right.
in. So, I mean, it's in times like now you
Spot to
really
be.
understand. Yeah, and then like I said, times like now you really understand how much of a tourism industry driven city this is. That's the kind of thing. It's like you live by the sword, you die by the sword type of thing.
Yeah.
And even so much so that not just people who work there and stuff, there's over between 20,000 and 25,000 villas and rental properties and vacation homes here. So, I mean, all those people, too, who usually bank on coming to stay in those places because they're close to the theme parks, they're also not really there. So it's amazing to be in, like, such a tourism-driven industry for the field that I'm in. And just because me being, like, such a big theme park enthusiast, like, it's amazing. It's probably the best thing I could have ever dreamed for.
Right.
But in terms of, when stuff goes south, it goes south. Like,
Hard. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like, and that's Houston. Like, I feel like if you're near, I mean, any coastal cities, hurricanes are rough. And usually, if a hurricane manages, because it's not easy for a hurricane to get inside the Gulf, and because the Gulf is so warm, usually if they get inside the Gulf, it's going to be a bad day. And I mean, it's, I don't know. Like, I feel like it's just way more, like, definitely not as, like, touristy, obviously. It's just a very business related city. I would say Houston. It's just very business related. There's not a lot of, I don't know very many people that are like, God, I can't wait to holiday in Houston. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see that happening. But we want to hear about your guys' cities too. We hope that you enjoy kind of like these, especially the Hall of History series, where we give a little piece of history and a little piece of like our personal lives as well. And I keep saying, like, in these episodes, don't get used to it because I don't usually enjoy doing that. But we keep doing these.
And here we are.
And here we are, peeling back the onion. But as always, the links to all of our social media accounts are going to be in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this Hall of History series.
And if you like this video, feel free to subscribe to our channel so you can be up to date on all of our videos. And feel free to also listen to our audio versions on Pandora, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and anywhere else you kind of want to see if we're probably there. Yeah, give them all a try.
At the same time, preferably.
Yeah, have multiple devices and just play it all throughout, like a symphony in your house of our voices. And if you're from Orlando, again, I apologize for any things I left out that you're like, I love that about my city. I apologize again. I live here, not from here. But that will do it for us on this week's Hall of History. As always, he's been Anthony. I've been Carlos. Remember, hometown pride sometimes is the best type of pride. Until next time.